Hello, everybody. My name is Peter Marsh. I was the founding resident director of the American Center for Mongolian Studies. So the very first one to start this office with Charles Krusekopf back in 2004. That was the year that we came to Mongolia and started our first office, which was in the National University of Mongolia, a big drafty office. When we got there, all that was there was two desks and a couple of chairs, that's all. So one thing that Charles and I had to do was to go out and actually locate all the stuff for an office, the computers, the printers, the paper, pens and pencils and everything else. And also to hire our first assistant director as well. So that was Enkhbaatar Demchig, who actually today is his birthday. I want to wish him a happy birthday. And so he was with us right from the very beginning too, helping to put together the ACMS and to make it what it is. And so the two of us started that office and got it going. Charles went back to America, but we were in close contact with Charles all that time. And just starting the work of the ACMS. In the beginning, much of that work centered around helping scholars, foreign scholars, who would come to Mongolia to do research work. So we were helping with the on-the-ground stuff of, everything from how to find a hotel, translators, but also to deal with the more technical stuff like visas, visa extensions, special permissions, and things of that nature. So I remember spending long hours, seemingly days, with Enkhbaatar, going to these ministries and waiting in line to talk to these bureaucrats to try to extend, to get the permissions and extend visas and things like that. So a lot of our work was sort of on the ground, hands-on work to help scholars do their work. But as time went on, we moved to we got moved to a different location, I guess several different locations, but we finally ended up in a space that we could begin to develop a library and just hire more people and just build services that could really benefit scholars not only from outside the country, Americans primarily, but also from Europe and other parts of the world, Japan, a lot of Japanese scholars, but also Mongolian scholars. That was an important part of what we did, was to really do our best to find ways to assist Mongolian students, Mongolian scholars, to build connections with scholars in the West, but also to do their own research. One of the probably the most important thing that we accomplished, one of the most important things we accomplished, was to get JSTOR here, to get scholars in Mongolia and scholars and students access to literature from the West. The kinds of stuff that we in the West take for granted, we were able to help provide that to scholars in Mongolia, and to begin this process of them in Mongolia understanding what's being researched in the West and how to make contacts with scholars in the rest of the world. When I think about Mongolian studies, so I graduated with a PhD actually in Mongolian Studies at Indiana University. So when I was there going through the program in the 1990s, it still felt like the old style of Mongolian studies was still present. And this was Mongolian studies that developed during the Cold War, when Western scholars from the West, from Europe and America, could not go to Mongolia. And as such, they spent a lot of their time focusing on books and studying ancient manuscripts and books that had been written by other people. And so very little on the ground kind of field work was being done. I first went to Mongolia when Mongolia first opened up in the early 1990s. So I'm part of this new generation of scholars who's going to understand what's going on now. What was going on in Mongolia on the ground. And so I think this has become sort of a new generation of scholars of Mongolian studies that looks at what's going on today in Mongolia and trying to address contemporary problems. We still have scholars who are addressing the ancient history, but we're also really interested in what's going on today. So I think the trends that was happening when we were there was the entrance of scholars from fields other than Mongolian studies kind of the traditional fields of Mongolian studies was like linguistics and history and things like that were interested in East Asia, North Asia, Mongolia. Now we were starting to get more and more people who were biologists, archaeologists, ethnobotanists and things like this who were studying other parts of the world but wanted to integrate their studies in Mongolia with what else is going on in other parts of the world. So that was really interesting. Mongolian studies is and should open up to people in all fields and bring them together. And that's one of the things I think the ACMS was able to do. I think that's why it's so important, is it really is on the ground, helping people, scholars from all different parts of the world, make connections with scholars in Mongolia too. So that was a really important aspect. I think a really important aspect to Mongolian studies in this day and age. I would say another trend we see in Mongolian studies is more and more people coming in, becoming interested in wanting to study Mongolia, but they don't have a PhD. They're not from the world of academia. They're more interested in other kinds, in learning more about Mongolia, studying Mongolia, but they don't want to get a PhD in Mongolian literature or something like that. So I think the ACMS is helping this, and I think in general the field needs to be open to those people who want to connect. Basically facilitating the contact between different peoples, from Mongolians and people from other parts of the world, to learn more about Mongolia at different levels, either at the high academic level all the way down to just people who are interested in Mongolia and want to study Mongolia and learn more about it. So I think these are areas that I think Mongolian studies can really open up. The ACMS and also the Mongolian the Mongolia Society, which I belong to as well. The Mongolia Society is a society that studies, that works with scholars. It has worked since the 1950s. It's the oldest American scholarly organization that does Mongolian studies, and it too needs to open up and kind of like be interested, working with people who are just interested in Mongolia at all levels.